right, we're ready to go here. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to share a few words about the genesis of this particular panel. Really, it was born of our interest in coming together with the people that we wanted to hear from about what's afoot in terms of financing the blue economy and in particular ocean climate solutions, and what needs to be afoot. So I hope that those are the two things you'll come away with from being part of this, what I expect will be a very rollicking conversation up here on the stage. And these people are, there's a method to the composition of this panel. And I'm going to just share what I see as some of the attributes of the people, and then let them introduce themselves and tell you more about their perspectives. So Torsten represents Ocean Public Project International Finance, tremendous experience across multiple institutions and multiple initiatives. And he brings that among many other attributes, including a wonderful sense of humor, as they all do. Caroline Clayson on this panel represents the research innovation perspective. You see our titles back behind us. I'm not going to belabor titles here. And then Albert, who has led a really venerable venture capital fund in New York that has increasingly directed itself into climate tech after having a lot of success in technology, enterprise software, and other things. So he'll tell us about that journey and his more recent evolution and orientation into ocean solutions. So I'm going to start out with Torsten and ask that original framing question, which is, we're here now at COP, where this is a massive gathering. Some might say a circus, but this crossroads of different government actors and different initiatives being announced. And some of them are really quite formidable and substantial. Would love for you to tell us about the ocean mangrove nature breakthroughs that you're working on and monitoring and paying close attention to.
Thank you so much, Julie. Great to be here with you all. And yes, I think the mangroves is a great example for what I see as a starting point, really, of a whole transformation, which puts ocean not only in the center of where it is in our global ecosystem as the most important process that we have, but also where we get the economic and financial system to understand that centrality, and where we use the tools that we already have in the financial world and the technology world to actually make that happen. So why mangroves is the starting point? It's one of the first natural capital asset classes that are developing based on proper science. We know what mangroves do for climate. We know the carbon sink value. We are increasingly realizing that the resilience value, the adaptation value, the biodiversity value are all to be added to the system. So what do I talk about? I talk about it as a blue natural capital asset. So we write about, with the Ocean Panel, 18 heads of state, about the Blue Carbon Handbook. It's all entry point to understand that these key nature-based solutions are not only a critical part for what we now call the 100% sustainable ocean plans and the whole government policies around those, but they actually have a significant, obviously economic value, but actually also a financial narrative that works. So if you plan blue infrastructure at the appropriate scale and integrate these nature-based solutions and do it well, that overall reduces the financial risk. So we got the insurance industry now engaged through the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. We've got, I mentioned the Ocean Panel, we wrote this paper recently on ocean climate solutions. 35% of the climate challenge can be addressed on that ocean side. But there is a little side effect from my perspective, which actually is huge, which is we need to change all the processes and methodologies around it to actually deliver us robust, almost real-time information so that decision makers base themselves on a system that is based on data infrastructure that has much lower transaction costs than what we have tried so far. And that's really why I'm so excited about this panel, because that's where the linkage lies. So I'm used to financing large infrastructure, such as subsea cables. Those subsea cables in the past told us nothing about the ocean. It took us 10 years to get the regulatory approvals to put smart sensors on those cables that will help us with essential ocean variables. It's an add-on when you lay the telecoms cable. It's a huge opportunity. And that's just one example. We have the opportunity through satellites. So we say to the marine protection community, look, we now have government commitments to protect 30 by 2030. That means significant satellite coverage. Well, we have now the tools to deliver the coverage. So it's one of a use case that also can be used for corporate uses for other actors. So it's that transformation of systems and values. And so the ocean breakthrough of 72 billion, it's a nice number to help concentrate people's minds, but it's really, to my mind, a much larger revolution we're talking about, one where finance people will be fully informed and therefore can make decisions that are aligned with nature.
Thanks. Oh my goodness, there's a lot there. What sprung to mind is I was at a carbon removals reception last night and met some people from the X Prize, and they were saying, other than the prize money, the bulk of their money goes to the verification of the that the entrants are actually to substantiate the claims. And I thought that's a really interesting source of innovation, because not only does it represent data that can be used for due diligence for investors in these X Prize entrants, but it also could serve as a source of innovation for the MRV side of potential opportunities in that space. I'd love to pick up that data theme and go to Carol Ann to share more about, Torsten mentioned the role of observing systems and really spurring these market growths. And I know that's a real core area of your research, which has really been substantial across multiple fields. And talk about that innovation potential, please.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I was thinking about, as you were talking about this, that one of the things that we hear about in terms of investment into the ocean in various ways, whether it's for offshore wind energy or other types of projects, is the risk, right? That there's a huge component of risk when you get out to the ocean, that governments themselves are not funding in the same way that they fund terrestrial projects, right? When you go to the terrestrial, there's a lot of infrastructure that has already been laid for you, and when you get out to the ocean, it's pretty much you doing it yourself and you doing the investments in that. And so I think, again, that data and understanding is a key part of de-risking and making it more beneficial and less risky for people to invest in the ocean. And so I think we're really at the start of a revolution of technology in the ocean. So one of the things that we do, that we think about at Woods Hole with some of our partnerships, is really thinking about the fact that what we do typically now is, as a group of scientists, is we think in the boutique fashion, right? We have a question, we ask that question, we think about what is it that we need to do. Sometimes we need to develop our own instruments, we need to develop our own tools, and we do that, but we're not necessarily thinking about how would you, for instance, scale that, right? What would you do so that if instead of making one of these, what if I wanted to make 1,000 of these, right? And really put them out, because that's a different question. And you almost have to start from a different perspective in order to do that. And so that's part of what we're doing with partnering with industry, is really talking with them and saying, okay, when you start this project, maybe we need to start thinking about that first, and then going through to the solution and saying, this isn't just a solution for the research question that I am asking, but it might be a solution for the market. And so really talking about that lab to market and that scaling type of solution. And I do think that innovation right now is leading in that direction. I think there's, especially on the computational side, and how that's going to integrate with sensors, I think we're on the cusp of making a real change in terms of what we can observe and the cost of observing it, and how we, in fact, even create our sensors. Is going to be, I think, very different in 10 years than it looks like right now. And I think that's going to make a difference and a revolution in terms of what kinds of data we can get, how much of that data we get, what that means in terms of risk, and helpful in terms of what do people want to invest in, because we have much more data around the system.
Thanks very much. Albert, I'm going to go to you for your share more about your story and your reflections.
Well, I think I want to just continue right in this vein of data, right? So I think we've made 2 ocean-related investments so far. One is, in fact, called So Far Ocean, and that is an instrumentation play. They have a buoy network. I think we sort of continue to underestimate how big this data problem really is. I also like to sail. There's debates of how many rogue wave exists and how big they are. And the fact that we don't know this is a good example that, like, we have very little data actually about the oceans. And so I think this makes it very challenging to make private investments because we tend to not necessarily love government as our only customer. So most of the companies we back, we like to have commercial pathways as well. And so the other ocean company that we've done actually takes ocean water and pumps it onshore, where you can measure very precisely what happens in the water, as one way of solving this problem. And so I do think this is one of the sort of most central issues, is how can we get much better measurement of what's happening in the oceans, so that ocean-based solutions can be measured to the same degree that we can measure land-based solutions today. I think this is really one of the central questions to address.
And maybe just to follow up on that, because I was talking to the Global Ocean Observing System at WNO recently, and I think you got your first part right in the sense of understanding that challenge. But I don't think science needs to deliver us the risk intermediation. Finance is quite good at that. Just provide us with the opportunity to show us where the risks lie, and not wait till it's scientifically all handled. Just identify the risk intervals and then find the risk intermediation tools. That's why I think some of the exciting conversations will be.
So you mentioned your work with insurance companies. Could you elaborate on that?
So for insurance, there are really 2 key aspects here. One is very simple. Most of coasts are not insured. Most of the people have no access to anything that deals with the disruption that comes from a big hurricane, the changes that come to their business and livelihood. So that's the first entry point. But then, obviously, insurance runs some of the most sophisticated climate models and need much more around the ocean side of things. But they then can provide direct parametric solutions for instance, specific events that are relevant to nature. And so giving, again, that's having the data from the potential impacts is all that the insurance company needs. If I know that the hurricane has a force of X, I pay out. I don't need all the traditional follow-up of assessment, etc. So this is what I meant about let's make the solutions faster and cheaper based on that data science revolution that you are delivering, but absolutely at scale. And my first conversation with the Argofloats person was, he said, like, can we add 3 more? And I said, how about 30,000? So.
I was on a panel at the World Ocean Forum, and it was on sea level, and it was with 3 non-oceanographers, and we were talking about sea level rise, and it was one gentleman there from a company, and someone had asked me the question, if I gave you 20 million, what would you do to help us constrain sort of the sea level rise? And so I gave an answer, but it was based on more data, essentially, was the answer. And I remember one of the gentlemen on the panel said, well, that's kind of silly. You don't need more data. What you need is much, much faster computers. And I took the mic back and I said, well, I mean, I can have a lot faster. I mean, I don't, if you gave me a lot faster computers, I mean, we would take it, obviously. But we have to have something from which to drive all of that. And they said, you've got tons of data. I have we work at a desalination plant and I have millions of data points. And I took the mic back and I said, but, we're talking about the polar regions and there's not as much data as you might think. But it was really fascinating to have this conversation with folks who are thinking, there's all this data available. You just need to use it better, right? And it would be silly to invest in more data. Since we're talking about data, I'd be very curious. One thing that we see is actually governments are funding less and less in terms of data, right? Argo is becoming fewer. The buoys that we have, there's funding fewer and fewer of them. So it's fascinating to me because we see sort of this market starting to say we really need this data. We have the governments actually pulling back a little bit from funding of getting that data. And somewhere in there, we need to come to some kind of either we need to find a way for the market to pick that up and help fund more of that data, or we need to be making a better case to the government saying, if you want to move forward in this area, we do need the data. The data is very influential. So I don't know if either of you...
Yeah, Albert, do you want to pick that up?
Well, commercial shipping is a potential revenue source for data, right? Because if you can hit the currents better, you can save up to 10% of time and fuel, and that's very, very meaningful in commercial shipping. So far, Oceans has commercial shipping customers. But I wanted to come back to two things. One is, I just think that one of the beautiful things that's happening is that our ability to collect data, the price has come way down, right? So we can now do hyperspectral imaging because we launch satellites more easily. We can combine that with buoy networks. We can have buoys that are very cheap and autonomous and can report back via things like Starlink too. So like I'll actually be doing a sail across the Atlantic next year, and we'll have Starlink for connectivity, which is a wonderful thing. So I think our ability to collect data has gone up, but somebody needs to pay for it. And I totally agree with you that it's governments dialing back on also weather data collection and so forth in the U.S. It seems like the exact wrong direction to be going into. Torsten, I think the point about insurance is I'm not as I guess I'm not as optimistic about insurance as you are, maybe. And I think the reason for that is that I guess I'm more pessimistic about tail risk. I think the tail risk is much, much larger. And I think we're beginning to see this with, like insurers saying we're not going to insure Florida bonds anymore, right? So we're not going to insure Florida municipal bonds because of sea level rise and because we all know the porous soil that's under Miami. And so what's been happening is that in Florida, for example, the state of Florida has created a captive insurance company, and that is now stepping in as the insurer because commercial insurers are withdrawing. And that's, of course, a very circular way of the government trying to insure itself. And so I don't know. I'm more skeptical about what insurance can ultimately do in oceans, personally.
I think it's a really interesting debate, and I think those two issues are linked. I think governments looking at science for standalone purposes, that's a tough argument. What we are saying is science to deliver specific regulatory needs that governments already have, that's a stronger argument. So we now have negotiated this new treaty for biodiversity in the high seas. Within that, we have a special fund as a financing mechanism. We argue that we need decent coverage of these large high seas areas so we can manage the marine protection. That's a data source. The government will, as they sign up to this treaty, need to deliver on that. They will look to what is the most effective, cheapest way of doing it. I think we have a strong case. I think with insurance, same thing. It's not the fact that you have insurance, it's the fact that the insurance company delivers us price points, which then allow me to say, this mangrove ecosystem, this seagrass bed is worth $190 per ton or whatever we can come up with, because if you don't have it, X billion of property is at risk. This infrastructure needs to be used. So all of a sudden, I have a narrative from a financial investment point of view, as well as from a government point of view. And so that's why I see insurance as part of the mix really important.
Fascinating. I'd love to pick up this example of so far. I'd love for you to share more about their evolution as a company. My understanding from conversations with Pete Rive.
Ongoing.
Well, right. So I talk to Pete Rive, who's the chair of the board, pretty regularly. My understanding is they started out as, providing the buoy, as a anchor, and then started selling the data, and now are selling ocean weather forecasts for commercial shipping for route planning. And that's been an evolution in terms of just being able to find sustained revenue sources. So is that emblematic of what these companies face as they broaden their reach in this sort of data or data as a service to platform?
I mean, our fund is, strictly investing in companies with the goal of them becoming financially self-sustaining, right? And so they need to have customers. And it's exciting to hear from Torsten that maybe we can have more government customers for this. And so I really want to follow up on what all the obligations are that countries are entering under this. But yes, at the moment, commercial shipping has been, one of the main revenue drivers for So Far Oceans.
The question about, what springs to mind also when you mentioned that piece about what is motivating the governments to seek more data. So Anya Waite, she's the head of the Ocean Frontier Institute. She's co-lead of GOOSE, Global Ocean Observation Networks, and she recently has been working with WMO to get surface ocean carbon measurements into the greenhouse gas emissions accounting for WMO, the World Meteorological Organization. And that's another example of once you say, okay, this needs to be measured, and at the international and country level, they recognize that this is an obligation, then that also presents the possibility of springing into action more motivation and potential financing for these measurements. But Albert, I'd like to go back to you and kind of get your thoughts about venture is one of the kind of earliest stages of financing, and we also have Torsten here who represents the project financing and government financing. Like, how do you see some of these ocean companies getting quite large, which could represent a mix of these types of monies or these flavors of capital? And what are some of your visions for how that unfolds?
Well, I think one of the reasons we've been talking about measurement so much here is because without measurement, it's very hard to get paid. And then, of course, we've also talked about who does the paying. Is it governments or commercial payments? And we have so far not hit on the word of to what degree part of the ocean economy will be based on some notion of CDR. And I think what we have experienced, at least in the US, among commercial buyers of CDR has been a kind of a rotation away from nature-based solutions. And I think that has been in part a result of people having sort of said, well, we've done these forest projects, and then we didn't really measure the forests, and we didn't really keep track of what happened with them, and turns out lots of bad things happened with these forests that we thought we had helped finance. And so at the moment, I'll give you a good example from our portfolio. So in our portfolio, we have a company called Lithus Carbon that just announced a very, very large, $70 million purchase of their enhanced rock weathering, which is spreading basalt on fields instead of lime. And they have a very rigorous MRV methodology for this, and we have all the measurement. Obviously, ocean alkalinity would be a way of scaling this type of carbon sequestration massively, but we don't have good MRV. And so I think buyers of this are very skittish. So I think if we want to have that, and I'd love to hear from all of you whether we think that's something we want to have, but if we want to have that, I think we need the measurement, because we have this fear that people don't want to, at least on the commercial side, I don't know about governments, put money behind something that subsequently might get measured by somebody else and say, well, that didn't exist.
Yeah, I think there's a whole platform opportunity there in the MRV space for oceans that spans blue carbon and ocean CDR. And the technologies for measurement of carbon sequestration can span those realms, and I think is more powerful that way. So you can present to the market that there is this commonality in terms of the ocean's ability to sequester carbon, whether it's nature or technology. They're complementary. They're not separate. I think there's some value in presenting it like that, because that's truly, how the ocean works, and some of the best, opportunities in the CDR space really enhance, accelerate, or mimic the natural processes of ocean carbon sequestration, and so that also, represents that commonality there. But I'd be interested in getting Torsten's take on that, and then the audience, please start thinking about questions that you may have, and I'll look back to you and look for hands in just a minute.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point we're at in this continuum of research, science, financeable opportunities. So for me right now, we sat with a dozen development finance institutions who are all starting to understand that ocean positive action is a development finance opportunity. So we wrote this paper about offshore wind, huge opportunity. Very little has happened in emerging markets. Why? Because this combination of regulatory framework, financial structuring, and assessment of impacts, that package wasn't there yet. But we know that it's a huge investment opportunity and the money is available. So how do we get that across? So Ørsted, very large company in that space, just issued both a green bond and a blue bond. So they use the green bond to deal with the actual rollout of the offshore wind, but the blue bond to deal with the biodiversity challenges and figuring out how to do it in a way that you're nature positive. So that's the reality of where things are happening at the moment, and we need to get large, long-term asset owners and pension funds, etc., comfortable with that ocean space and give them entry points. And buying a blue bond from a large corporate or from a multilateral is a good first step. But then over time, we need everybody to understand that centrality of these ocean systems and its physics, its chemistry, and very much ocean biology. And that's why the essential ocean variables are so crucial, and all that scientific work. And I think there we're still at a discussion stage, because I think just getting the ocean into the Paris Agreement discussion took us a few years. We now have an ocean climate dialogue. It's still quite recent for a lot of that broader universe to understand the centrality.
I was just going to add, one thing that strikes me is that the ocean has always been in some ways central to many of our issues as humans. If we look over time, shipping and the storms and the weather that came along with that and how it impacted our shipping, and then weather, our understanding of the ocean and the impact back that it plays on multiple weather events, not, hurricanes being an obvious example of it. Now there's an interest in CDR. What I find in all of these is that the ocean is just such a crucial part of the Earth's system, that it impacts so many human endeavors, and it has through the centuries, and we are always playing catch up. Here we are talking about CDR, and we have little information that we need in order to really understand the efficacy of it, the impacts that it will have, how we even measure it, right? And so to me, I've been thinking that we continually undervalue the role of the ocean, and then we're playing catch up in terms of what kind of data do we need, what do we need to know, and if we could just think a little bit about whether CDR works or it doesn't work, whatever happens, the next thing that will come up in the ocean is likely, eDNA. It may be, biological in nature. It may be pharmaceutical in nature. We continually, life on Earth depends on the ocean. And so even when we hit these cycles of we need to know this a little bit more, for this particular reason or not, we still find ourselves woefully lacking in basic knowledge about the ocean in which to do that. And so when these opportunities come up, people are thinking, oh, well, we'll just do some MRV in the ocean. And then you realize we have no basic understanding of, the entire carbon cycle and, what's happening and all of these types of questions. And so, part of it to me is if we could just make the value proposition about the ocean in general and the role that it plays sort of in the climate and weather system and in the ecosystem of the world. And then we could perhaps, as these things come and go, we as humans would be better prepared to say, this is an opportunity that I didn't realize. Oh, here we are, offshore wind. That's a really great thing. How does that impact the ecosystem? How really do we understand what's happening in the near surface, atmosphere and ocean and how that might impact back on, energy generation, right? We keep finding ourselves behind when we come up with a really necessary problem because we haven't been observing the ocean in the way that we should.
Comments, questions from the audience? Yes, please. Okay, I see two. I see one. Oh my goodness, I see five. All right, let's start there and then go to the back of the room.
Hi, thank you so much for the panelists for this exciting discussion. I'm from the National University of Singapore, and I just wanted to pick up on what Torsten said about how most coastlines are not insured. So in Southeast Asia, we're an archipelago, and there are many communities exposed to coastal hazards like tropical cyclones and typhoons. I just wanted to find out what the panelists think about the idea of raising revenue through the sale of carbon credits from blue carbon habitats and channeling part of that revenue into paying parametric insurance premiums. Do you think that that is a feasible way to ensure that coastal communities can continue to get protection? And if it's possible, what are some data gaps? Thank you.
That's ready-made for Torsten.
Yeah, no, this is a great strategy of putting these systems together. And I think the challenge we had in the past is that by just focusing on one of these blue carbon ecosystems and selling just those credits at far lower a price than what the social cost of carbon is, we just didn't have enough revenue sources to actually cover those kinds of opportunities. So absolutely crucial. And obviously insurance, again, it's one of these regulation questions. We had this discussion to do this in the Philippines or in Indonesia. Very different insurance regulatory environments. So we started in one of them. We hope the other one will follow. Yes, great opportunity. You're absolutely right.
And at the back of the room. And then can the others put their hands up so I see where you are? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, thanks.
Hi, Ellen Talley from Scripps. I kept wanting to leap forward and say, you need biogeochemical Argo. My question is our dilemma with this. We have developed an instrument and gone from 1 to 700. We can deploy and are deploying globally. This is under research and infrastructure funding from National Science Foundation. Taking the next step to turning that into the observing system, that is really the only way to look at the open ocean, the big open ocean, changes in carbon, changes in oxygen, changes in nutrients, changes in productivity at a global scale. Which we demonstrate we can do, but we are really up against a wall about what to do when the funding runs out in 2 years, and we have developed this global observing system. Where do we go?
Yeah, it's a opportunity to get creative about financing, and I'd love to hear whoever wants to take that in. Caroline?
I think that's just an example of what I was talking about in terms of that there are these huge societal needs, and the government is, very far behind in funding them, and we haven't figured out how to connect those societal needs with how it impacts back on the economy in such a way that we can use the economy to fund those needs. And I come to this from also the satellite side, where I feel like for many, many years we've tried to run these, economic analyses, and we've tried to make these arguments. It costs the government X, if we don't have a forecast of a hurricane to better than Y, right? And we continually try to tie our science to a monetary side, and we just have not been very successful at us making that, right? The meteorologists and the oceanographers making that connection. And so having more people in the space who come from the finance side who said, I actually know how to make that how to make that argument in a way that can be, that really people will listen to and say there is value in this. It's not just us saying our data is valuable. It's others coming in and saying, for this reason, this data is valuable to us. I'm just not sure whether we are going to pick the finance side of the blue economy is going to pick that up fast enough to cover where the governments seem to be retreating from.
Yeah, I'm slightly more optimistic in the sense that it's taking this opportunity and beyond making the economic valuation case, which I think we can do very clearly, and make the investment case. And the investment case about creating asset classes where I can put my money into. When I started in infrastructure finance, it was done by essentially public financing bodies on a project-by-project basis. If I was a large insurance company, a pension fund, I could not buy infrastructure. Now I can. And therefore, very large amounts are flowing in that class. We need to make blue infrastructure, we need to make these ocean opportunities an investable structure that works at that large investment level. And that will then trigger through the whole system so that your companies can scale up and that funding can flow to supplement these government financings where the government will increasingly focus on where do they have to do things to deliver on existing obligations.
Interesting. All right, we have 4 questions here. Let's just run around in a circle. So we'll go to you, then Ken, then you, and Rama. Okay.
Great. First of all, thank you very much for all of the work that you're doing. My name is Doug Heskey. I'm CEO of New Day Impact based out of San Francisco, California. I'm curious as to what you envision are the major catalysts that we all as ocean advocates should be focused on to drive change. What is the behavior that we can help you with the work that all of you are doing? Ocean financing has, from our perspective, always been sort of the forgotten stepchild of climate, where tens of billions of dollars have flowed over the last number of years. How do we change that? And what can we be doing as community participants to drive that?
Quick answer to you, pick top quartile companies on ocean. So it's that impact narrative taken to the real corporate space. So that I can say, look, you're just a pharmaceutical company, you are the pharmaceutical company that has figured out its ocean impact and is reporting on it appropriately. So if I have the choice between an investment in one or the other, I go with the ocean one.
Okay, so mechanisms for that. So the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, just released a framework in the September timeframe. There's thousands of companies that have reported under the precursor, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And they are, let's say for TNFD, hungry for ocean data. So this is, a way to sort of catalyze companies to be reporting under TNFD and then encourage customers to support those companies that are...
Too little deep ocean in it at the moment. But yes.
No, say it again. No, expand that.
No, it's really interesting. When we talked to TFND, they said, look, we can bring in some ocean, but it's actually coastal ocean because we have some information there. And they said, no, the whole ocean is central. Deep ocean in particular is neglected. We need to bring in deep ocean data into that whole decision-maker process. And so Science-Based Target Initiative, another of these efforts, I think there's a lot happening, but we need to constantly make sure that where the ocean lens is not in it yet, we just voluntarily go ahead with it.
Albert.
So I'm more with you, which is that I think we're so far behind, and we keep making this mistake where we're like, oh, well, it's just going to take this. I really think we're so far behind that unless we can convince governments globally that we need to go on some kind of more war footing when it comes to the whole climate crisis, I think we're going to be fucked. I mean, we can't even figure out how much heat has already gone into the oceans. We know that most of the heat has gone into the oceans, but because we don't have depth measurement, we don't actually know how much. And we could be off, too. And that influences how much we think about what's the actual, energy balance of the Earth system. We just don't know. There's like fundamental things we don't know. And the fact that we don't know them and that we're having these discussions, and also I looked at like 7 parametric insurance companies, and I passed on every single one of them because I think they're also going to be effed. Because I just think our models are wrong and the tail risk is bigger, and I think they're all going to get wiped out. I would so hope I'm wrong about this.
Okay.
I so hope I'm wrong about that.
All right, there we go. You heard it here. Ken.
Hiding here in the corner, Ken Bisley from Woods Hole. We heard, I think it was Carol Ann, that we have little understanding of CDR, carbon dioxide removal in the ocean, marine CDR in particular. But the way to get that that understanding, it seems it's coming through the finance world as carbon credits, whether it's voluntary or whatever, companies being set up, venture capital is coming in. It's all based on MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification of carbon. That's the financial cost. That's what people get back for the reward for doing this. But there's a huge ecological consequence that goes along with any of these, whether you're adding alkalinity, growing seaweed, putting in iron. So who's going to pay for EMRV, the ecological monitoring, reporting, and verification? No cost to that. It's not happening. That's my fear, I guess. So make me less fearful and tell me who's going to be responsible for those types of costs so we don't create a new industry that causes as much damage as fossil fuel has caused.
Thanks for that really important question. Carol Ann?
I'm not really the person to answer that question, but I can't seem to give the mic. Oh, there we go.
Well, okay, so to continue with my previous rant, the other big thing about the climate crisis is that the food system, the global food system, is, I think, much more fragile than people are willing to admit. The oceans are a great source of food. So I do think one way to get at this is to think about the ocean food chain and how it feeds humanity, or at least in part. And so I'm not sure what the pathway to that is, but I mean, we do have some understanding, and it's obviously work that you've done, Ken, yourself, on how these things hang together with what we ultimately consume out of the oceans as humans. And so I think that may be the starting point where especially nations that particularly have traditionally been in fishing, and maybe even commercial fishing operators, can be one vector into understanding what this will do to the ecosystem of the ocean.
I'll just say that does tie in a little bit to my point about that we keep coming up with individual needs for the ocean. We need to understand the ocean for hurricane forecasting. We need to understand the ocean for MRV. And it's not possible to really understand what's happening with the system by observing it, just one set of variables in one place. And that's where we're really behind, because we don't understand it as a system. We're not measuring it across, all the possible variables, so that we come to a question like this. This is a new need that people are talking about in the ocean, and we're looking at it and we're saying, and yet our ignorance is vast. Not just for that. If it were just for that question, that would be one thing, but we don't understand the whole carbon cycle. Then when we put that together with the currents and the storms and, every other aspect of it, and we're behind everywhere. So I like the war footing kind of analogy, but I think that's just an example of we have missed for so long the opportunity to really observe and understand the ocean. And at some point, we just have to kick into a higher gear, or we're asking these questions in almost a vacuum.
Okay, we're going to go here, then Rama, and then Martin.
Hi, my name is Lisa Lang. I work for EIT Climate Kick. We are the climate activation agency for the European Commission. So, one of the big packages under the Green Deal will be, for instance, CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which basically just turns carbon footprint of all industry into a cost factor. But it's the Green Deal, which, you know, as the color already says, is like, so there's a lot about forestry and cities and region. And of course, but there is something called the Blue Deal coming up, and it's a little bit in infancy. And I was like wondering, like, if you have also like policy on the radar, and also like what would be kind of like your wish list, because, you know, one of those things we have realized is that we have to bring policy and industry closer together. So, yeah.
Once
But you know,
again,
how
for
can
Torsten.
like what is policy? What is the handbrake in policy? Because that's how usually it is perceived, and how can we unlock it?
No, great question, and that's why I refer to the sustainable ocean plans. If you plan 100% of your marine space sustainably, you take all these concerns into account, and if you want to do it right, you do need to measure all these things you're talking about. So I think we already have that broader political commitment. So what I think in the ocean governance space, where we are working with DG Mara and others around how the EU can not only figure out its own ocean governance, but really work on international ocean governance. So how do we align the ocean governance efforts, the marine spatial planning, the sustainable blue economy narrative in Europe with Africa, for instance? There's great opportunities. A lot of the initial efforts around ocean science for the Atlantic focused on the North Atlantic. We're now, fortunately, doing the whole Atlantic. We've got I-Atlantic, we've got Atlantos, we've got these efforts to really look at Atlantic as a whole. And so what I've been saying to the European Commission is, well, take it around all of Africa, bring all these, because it's that system approach. So I think there is that political interest, and we just need to create exactly that linkage in a more direct way between where the science policy interface lies. And clearly for policy to move, you also need that private sector push. You need that opportunity for real investment that comes alongside that policy.
I love how your mind works. Just how you line all these things up and create. There's just a generative element to how you think. It's really powerful. Rama, to you.
Thank you, Julie. What a great panel. Really wonderful. I have a comment first and a question. You know, oftentimes we hear this, oh, there's plenty of money, but no good ideas. You know, if only we have those ideas, we'll be able to fund everything. And then we talk about the potential and the opportunity of the blue economy, whether it is CDR or other things. But then we say that we don't have MRV, so we can't really do much with it. But supposing you have an opportunity, you know, if the UN Secretary General were to invite all four of you and say, backed by lots of money, to say that, well, this is a crisis and we need solutions, and you all talk about blue economy opportunities, how do we get this right? What do you need? What do you have to do within a time frame that makes sense in meeting the Paris climate goal? What would you say?
Who wants to start? So I'll start, because I think there's some really fundamental questions about, you know, we all recognize the oceans are the seat of our climate, but there's some fundamental uncertainties around different elements in the Earth system and their stability, and those near-term state shifts potential are all localized in our ocean. So that's coral loss, ice loss, overturning circulation. So some of these big opportunities about scaling the blue economy may just be obviated if we end up on an Earth system trajectory where things go awry and it's a different planet. So I think the first thing we need to do is to figure out where we really are on an Earth system trajectory. I mean, listen, the Ocean Pavilion has hosted some incredible discussions. Often they're very early in the morning, but there was one on phytoplankton at 8 a.m. Yesterday it was the polar regions, and then I was on a coral panel right after that. But these are areas that are experiencing, you know, vast extremes, 4 to 5 times warming in the Arctic. And we need to be characterizing not just what's happening, but where's that going? Because these opportunities in the blue economy may be way different than we think. and others may come into play. So I think this is not what I'm meaning to convey is this is not a static situation that we're in, where we can just say, oh yeah, the potential for offshore renewables is going to keep growing, and it's going to be like, that's one world, but that's not the only world that's ahead of us. And I think a better characterization of these risks, where there's going to be a digital twin discussion right after this that will address some of these elements. Like, I think that's pretty fundamental, but I welcome others to share.
So one thing that I think about with our community in particular is I think that much of what we do is driven by scarcity. So there's a whole discussion that we could have about scarcity, but so much of what on the science side that we do is because resources are very, very scarce. And so that colors how we approach problems, what problems we approach, and how we go about that. And I was thinking of that when I was watching the movie Oppenheimer this summer, and they were talking about the scientists there, and they were saying these are scientists who are used to very little money and infinite time. And now what they have is infinite money and very little time. And they had to completely rethink how they approach problems. And I think that we as a field are sort of in that position of, we know that there's an emergency, but at some level we have very little money and kind of infinite time.
But Catalytic, that's exactly what I was thinking of. I mean,
Right.
when particularly Albert said war footing, that's what I was
Place
thinking.
purchase orders.
Yes.
Huh?
Place purchase orders.
Expand on that.
Buy stuff from companies. Buy data. Buy, like, where all our money comes from, we're printing it. I mean, the government. It's just, the problem is, in World War II, we spent 50% of GDP on the war effort. We're spending 4% on the climate effort. It's just wrong. And so the money's only going to come, which is why climate activism is so important. I mean, the money's only going to come once governments decide that the problem is so as big as it really is. I mean, this is the problem. I mean, I listened into 2 hours of discussion of, on the treaty yesterday or the day before yesterday. And on the one hand, it's really lovely seeing all the people in the room, a lot of young people being very earnest and having great discussions. On the other hand, it feels a little bit like we're arguing whether the deck chair should be slightly to the left or slightly to the right on the Titanic. I mean, we just need to start spending the money. I mean, you have the technology, right? I mean, we just need to buy a lot of it. And where does the money come from? It needs to come from not spending on other stuff. I mean, I don't know.
Martin, to you, and then we may be close to the close here.
Fantastic panel. I'm sorry I had to run in and out a little bit, but I think what we just touched on, Ken's point, I think about getting the complete pictures. Carol Ann, you basically said, look, it's a system that we got to look at. You mentioned digital twins as one of the ways to do it, but actually I want to come back to the finance side. When I talk to finance people, in particular in the blue sector, and I'm not talking about philanthropists, I'm talking about real finance people who don't care where they put their money where they get a safe return. And if you look at that portfolio, Ocean is at the 5%, 3% level, right? And I talked to them, and I asked them, so why don't you invest in Ocean? And you know what the answer was? Too risky. Too risky. Now, on land, our governments de-risk investment by, if you want to build a factory, they give you the road, they give you free internet, they put housing up for people. So the government de-risks finance. And I think in our space, that is, I think, I would agree with you, Albert, where the money should come from. If the governments want to see real investment in the ocean, they have to de-risk it. And you de-risk it by a sustained ocean observing system, by proper model capability, by digital twin technology, so the investors see what the potential outcome is of their intervention, whatever it might be. They can look at the side effects, Ken, because they're very worried about it, that they're doing something they're going to get held accountable for, that they're going to lose more than what they gained, right? So it's the risk that's the problem. And I'm always, when I talk to them, I say, I'm in the business of de-risking blue investment by fighting for sustained observing, by improving models, by doing digital twin technology. I think that is the leverage. And somehow our governments, they get it on land, but just don't want to do it in the ocean.
So one of the most straightforward ways of doing that is to have an ocean-focused development bank. We have 520 development finance institutions. There's not one that has the word ocean in its title. Setting up an ocean sustainability bank as an outcome of this COP and then UNOC 3 would be the most straightforward way to put, say, 50 billion at work to deliver on all of these activities and support the private sector to come in alongside it.
And there we've gotten to the what should be afoot. We just have a few minutes left. I'm going to do a last question back here, the lady in red. And then please give Torsten forbearance as he makes his way to the airport straight away at the end.
Thank you. Very, very happy to have caught Torsten before he leaves, so that's quite a treat. I'm Barkam with IUCN, working on the regenerative blue economy portfolio. And this discussion is extremely interesting because the idea is really to create alternatives to more destructive practices in the ocean economy, in the blue economy. I'm coming at it from a different angle, whereby how would you then de-risk or create the financial basis or the kind of patient capital that would underpin solutions or investment in a regenerative blue economy in the developing world? Because earlier you mentioned we just need to buy the technology, but one of the huge issues that remains in some different parts of the world is that you keep buying technology, but it moves at such rapid pace, and it's just not, it's not transformative. So obviously this is not something that we can crack in the next 3 minutes, although I'm sure Torsten would have the capacity to spark some ideas. But yeah, I would love to start that conversation and reflection. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's why we talked about impact earlier. Proper impact measurement includes social impacts. So engaging with local communities, being clear about how your engagement works with them, helps them, allows for economic opportunity that is aligned with environmental, with the broader narrative of ocean sustainability is absolutely key.
Thanks for this conversation, and thanks to you all for being in conversation with us. Please stick around for the next panel on digital twins, and have a wonderful rest of the day.